I was a janitor at 16. As soon as I got out of high school, I had to work. My mom was a nurse and raised me on her own. It was my dream to go off to college and become an architect. We simply couldn't afford it. My mom tried to convince me that she would be able to hustle for my studies, but I didn't want to see her work harder than she already does. So, on the day I received my acceptance letter, I threw it in the trash. I couldn't get a scholarship, and even though I graduated 2 years earlier than most, my grades weren't good enough. So, I decided I'd just work and help my mom with everything. My name's Josh, and my childhood friends and my classmates looked down on me. But I brushed it all off. I knew I was doing my best. One day, as I was mopping the floors at the bank I was working at, one of the bankers who worked there slipped on the wet floor and she immediately rounded on me and started shouting. "Why is this floor all wet? It's unsafe leaving it this wet when people are walking through here." I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm just doing my job." "Then do it better! You could at least put a wet floor sign up!" I pointed at the wet floor sign that was right in front of her. "Well, it's not at the part where I slipped, is it?" If you looked at the floor instead of your phone, ma'am, maybe you would have seen..." She slapped me. "You trying to be smart with me?" "I'm sorry, ma'am. I was just pointing out that..." "Of course not. You're just a janitor. You mustn't be that smart if you're working minimum wage. Remember this day, smart mouth, because I will make sure it will be the last day you ever work here." Just then, someone coughed in the waiting area. Lisa looked shocked. She didn't know someone else would already be there that early in the day. It was an old woman. Lisa smiled at her. "Oh, I'm so sorry you had to hear that. I didn't know there was already a customer here." "Of course you didn't. Please do not talk to your janitor that way." "And I suggest you mind your own business. This boy ruins my Chanel jacket. So unless you're paying for it, sit back down and wait for me to attend to whatever small withdrawal you'll be making today. What do you want anyway? Making a deposit or a withdrawal?" The woman laughed. "I came here to discuss my investment in your little bank with an old friend of mine. Mr. Hoffman? Ring any bells?" Lisa began to panic. She had no idea the old woman who was dressed so simply would be someone so important. Mr. Hoffman? The owner? You're Mrs. Green! Oh, of course! I'm so sorry, ma'am. I didn't know you'd be in this early. I'll call Mr. Hoffman for you, and please forgive me for the way I spoke. I didn't know you were... a person? A valued client? Save it, young lady. If the way you treat people in this establishment is an indication of how you do business, I think I'd rather invest elsewhere. And I'll make sure Mr. Hoffman hears that you're the reason I'm pulling out." The woman walked, and Lisa was left there, opening and closing her mouth in shock. I saw that she had left a folder, so I grabbed it and ran after her. I caught up just as her driver was opening the door to her shiny black Cadillac. "Ma'am, you left these." "Oh, I don't need those anymore. And if I can give you any advice, don't let people talk to you like that. You can always find another job." I chuckled. "Thanks, ma'am. But it's not like I'll ever have employers lining up around the block." Now why do you say that?" Mrs. Green invited me into her car, and I told her about my life. When the car finally stopped, I looked up and saw a building so high, it was impossible to count how many floors it had. "Tell you what, why don't you work here? For me?" "That's a whole lot of floors to mop, Mrs. Green." "Just call me Angie. I'll double your salary, and you can be my messenger. You'll take care of my personal mail, run a few errands, That's gotta be better than mopping floors, right? That's very kind of you, ma'am, but the bank, don't you worry about them. I'll give Mr. Hoffman a call. I'll tell him I've poached his best janitor, and he'll be so sorry he lost you. That's how I ended up working for the richest, yet nicest woman I had ever met. And she was like a grandmother to me. She would always check in on me, and sometimes she'd take me on trips with her family. I became more than her messenger. We became friends. And one day, on one of those trips, I met her daughter. Her name was Irene, and she had been away in Europe for the last 2 years. Irene and I became fast friends. When she talked about everything she learned in Europe, it would all go over my head. But then, I'd make her laugh, and she liked that. When Mrs. Green saw that we became close, she told me that she had never seen Irene laugh as much as I made her. She told me Irene would usually stay in a corner and not talk to anyone, not even her. And so, she made me another offer. Angie told me that I could take care of her daughter. She would triple what I earned. All I needed to do was take care of whatever Irene needed. Of course, I said yes. What I didn't know was how difficult that job would be. Irene had 2 sides. One was the Irene that I met on holiday. The other was the Irene who grew up being the only daughter of a billionaire CEO. The 2 Irenes were wildly different. One moment we'd be joking about, and the next, she'd throw tantrums. Some days she was nice. Some days she'd make me drive her to school in the Ferrari her mom forbade anyone to touch, just to show off. Drive me to school, and fast! She got depressed, too. And when she did, she'd drag me off to all the luxury shops, and she'd splurge on anything that caught her fancy. And I'd have to carry all the bags. When Irene got lonely, she would take the jet or the yacht. And of course, I had to go with her. We would fly to distant cities and sail to private islands. Also, she could meet her friends and party with them. One time, when she was missing her best friend who lived in Italy, we flew on her mom's jet just so she could have coffee with her friend. Then we flew back that very same afternoon. The amount of money she spent on her whims would have been enough to give poor people like me and my mom a lifetime of no worries. I told her that as a joke one day, and she got very mad. She fired me. It was a week before Mrs. Green noticed I wasn't at the house anymore, and she came to visit me at my mom's. She explained why Irene was that way, and that she couldn't fire me because I worked for her and not Irene. She apologized, because, as she said, Irene was a handful, and she trusted that I could handle her. She told me why she was sad all the time, and it was because she was still heartbroken that her dad left her to start a new family with some other woman. A woman who was the same age as Irene. I returned to their house and looked for her. What I saw shocked me. It was Lisa, from the bank. She was standing over Irene. Her hair was all a mess, and there was a scary look on her face. When she saw me, she laughed like a maniac. You think you people can get fired for no reason? You ruined my life. I lost my job, my house, my fiancé, my dog. Now it's time to make the mighty Mrs. Green suffer the consequences. She grabbed Irene and dragged her out of the window. She kept running with her, and I saw that there was a van waiting outside. I panicked. I asked the maid to call security. I told Mrs. Green to call the cops. But it was the busiest time of the year, and there was a huge parade downtown where all the cops probably were. It's the holidays. I always send my staff away during the holidays. Please, save my daughter. I ran through the window and gave chase, but even with Irene wildly thrashing and resisting, Lisa was already at the gates. The van sped away before I could even run past the driveway. It was then that Mrs. Green threw me a car key and the garage door opened. It was the vintage Ferrari. It's the fastest car I've got. Go after them! The streets were empty. I sped through like lightning, trying to catch up to a van that was way faster than it looked. When I finally caught up, Lisa had taken Irene to the pier. She hauled her onto a boat, and I jumped onto it just as it was leaving the docks. I cornered them, but Lisa was holding Irene at the very edge of the boat. "Don't come any closer!" "Lisa, she's done nothing wrong to you. Please, she's innocent. Let her go. I'm the one who caused all this." And I saw it click in Lisa's head. "You're right. I shouldn't be suffering. You should. But I'm still gonna take as much money as I can for her ransom." She pushed Irene away and grabbed me. She was about to push me off the boat when I saw a mop close by, and I saw the patch of wet floor separating her and Irene. I screamed at Irene to call for help, and when Lisa ran after her, she slipped. I grabbed the mop and used it to pin her down. You should really watch out for wet floors. Irene and I tied her up and sailed back to dry land. We waited for the authorities, and after all that, Irene was so thankful that I rescued her, she fell in love with me, and I fell in love with her. Now, I'm getting married to a billionaire heiress. Lisa's in prison. And guess what? Angie gave me the Ferrari.